You know, the day after I won my election, I got hundreds of phone calls, as you might expect. Many from supporters and friends, but also many from people who work in and around this Senate. Mostly folks called to congratulate, but many of you who called me had a different message. You told me that the Senate is a deliberative body. It is slow and it is methodical. And the culture of the Senate is one of civil engagement. You might sharply disagree with some of your colleagues, but you must show them respect and not pick personal fights. We owe that to the people that elected us. So today, Mr. President, I'm sorry to say I'm not feeling respected. The legislation on the floor is targeted, disrespectful, hateful, and dangerous. So, Mr. President, by bringing forward this legislation and voting for it, my colleagues on the other side are picking a political fight with no other outcome other than to score points with their base, embarrass the governor, and demonize our people, those who live in the Twin Cities.
Mr. President.
Senator Chamberlain, for what reason do you rise?
I just would like to remind the body that you cannot, if I'm correct, imply intent. The good senator from Minneapolis, I think, is crossing or near crossing line of implying intent upon the members of this body. It's not appropriate. Implying motive.
Thank you, Senator Chamberlain, for the reminder. Senator Fateh, please continue with that in mind.
Mr. President.
Senator Dibble, for what reason do you rise?
As one who is often accused of the same falsely in this body, I would say that Senator Fateh was not impugning or implying intent. He was characterizing the outcome of this legislation, which he should be free to do, free from being interrupted and free from having his comments mischaracterized. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, this is let Senator Fateh please keep your comments to the bill in front of us. Masons is very clear. You're not to impugn any motives of any other member. So, Senator Fateh, to Senate File 749.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to both of the senators. So I'm here to let everyone know that by doing this, we're not sticking it to the governor, we're not sticking it to the mayors in the Twin Cities, or the city councils. It's the people that we're hurting. So in a time in which we were devastated by two crises, COVID-19, as well as the murder of George Floyd, you are kicking people while they're down, rather than proposing meaningful action. So I wish right now that we were acting like a deliberative body. I wish I was on the floor today to debate the best path forward for public safety in our districts and in our state. But that's not what we're here to do today, because everyone in this building knows that this proposal to withhold LGA will never, ever be signed into law. What we are doing here today is purely partisan politics, which will result in no meaningful outcome to benefit the people whose lives have been upended by the crises of police brutality and COVID-19, especially our black and brown residents, people that look like me. So we are wasting time because there's much more important issues to debate, like what is the best path forward for the public safety of Minnesota. And in discussions related to this bill, like the one being debated in the House right now, even Republican Representative Garofalo stated that this LGA proposal was acting recklessly. In my view, it is not just reckless, it is punitive and anti-human. So as the senator for South Minneapolis, myself and my colleagues in the Posse Caucus, as well as my colleagues in the Minneapolis delegation, we are all left wondering, are we here to come up with a plan to best uphold peace, safety, and the well-being of our residents, or are we doing a highly political dance? So, Mr. President, while we are debating the most appropriate way to ensure funding for law enforcement, we are ignoring the facts of what happened last year. It is as if we have amnesia. The pretense of this legislation is that Minneapolis is irresponsibly diverting funds from its police department, the force is short-staffed, and we need to force Minneapolis to take its obligations towards public safety more serious. But there's a major problem with that story, Mr. President. The problem with these dynamics that we are seeing is that one being Minneapolis police officers leaving the force, and the other being activists and policymakers discussing a new vision for public safety that doesn't solely rely on police. These are a result of a broken system of public safety, of years of brutality disproportionately targeting black and brown people. They are the result of the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that followed. It is not the cause. So George Floyd was murdered in the district that I represent. And in the days that followed, much of the civil unrest that we're talking about here today took place in my community. As expected, community members took to the streets to protest the atrocious murder by 4 MPD officers. But our protests were peaceful and yet met with nothing but pure disrespect and escalation by police officers. Yes, the protesters were angry at the police, but the police were also angry at the protesters. The police took our calls for systemic change, for a system that works for all of us and provides justice for all of us, as a personal attack rather than a genuine outcry for meaningful change that's permanent. So this conflict, this clash of values, led to the escalation of the unrest into riots which started as an organic movement centered at the 3rd Precinct, but eventually spread through to citywide destruction of our small businesses, and the maiming of dozens of protesters, many of who were shot in the face by rubber bullets and are now receiving settlements because they did nothing to deserve that level of brutality. We also know, as stated today by many of us on both sides, that not everyone involved in the riots were there in good faith. We know that there were outsiders who came into our city looking for violent political fights, and others who came for no reason other than to have a little fun in a city during a vulnerable time. And I'll give you a little story about that. During one afternoon while the peace was lost in our city, a number of my friends and comrades posted up at our campaign office to provide food, water, and medical supplies, an escape route to people caught in the conflict. On that afternoon, we gave a few water bottles to a barefoot white man in a black van with unmarked plates. Later, we learned that that same man opened fire at the Pimento Kitchen at a group of largely black and brown people who were out and about not to cause destruction, but to provide mutual aid. And we saw other instances of opportunists coming in to loot and destroy. We know the American Indian movement stopped a group of Wisconsin teenagers from breaking into a liquor store in the Little Earth area. And after much deliberation, the AIM activists determined what they lightheartedly joked was a cruel punishment fit for a heinous crime. They called the boys mothers. So what these stories and countless other stories illustrate is that the people of Minneapolis are the victims of what happened last year, not the perpetrators. The perpetrators were the 4 MPD officers who murdered a black man in broad daylight over the course of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The perpetrators are the police who took the opportunity to settle a score with the activists whose irresponsible actions resulted in a week of violence and destruction across our cities. And the perpetrators are those who were out in the streets causing trouble in our neighborhoods, not for justice for George Floyd, but because they saw an opportunity to further provoke political unrest in our country or simply to have a little fun in our expense. So these stories show us who the real heroes were last summer. These heroes were not us politicians, and it was not the police. The heroes were the activists and the community members, those who were on the ground, cleaning up the streets in the morning and protesting at night. It was people like the organizers with the American Indian movement, people like our faith leaders who opened up their places of worship as a sanctuary during a time of great danger. People like the street medics who posted up only a few hundred feet away from burning buildings to make sure that folks who were hurt were treated.
Mr. President.
Senator Johnson, for what reason do you rise?
Point of order.
Please state your point of order, Senator Johnson.
It seems to me that the debate is getting far afield from the question of the bill, the underlying bill. Mason's section 101, paragraph 1. Debate must be confined to the question before the body. and I would like it to pertain to that, please.
Senator Fateh, please continue with your comments, but please make them specific to Senate File 749, which is the bill that we're on. Further
Thank you, Mr.
discussion
President.
on Senate File 749. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. So with this understanding of history, of what actually took place, I implore you, let's come together on public safety. Let's come up with a plan which would empower those who have the community relationships necessary to keep the peace. And let's fund action to keep our streets safe. So the bill in front of us today does not address any of the problems that we saw last year. It changes nothing from last year, because what we saw was the full presence of MPD, and all of our mutual aid agreements together could not keep the peace. The peace was lost when 4 officers decided to take the life of a black man over the crime, or the alleged crime, of a counterfeit $20 bill. And until we get our act together and come up with the political will to confront a broken system of policing, what happened to George Floyd will happen again and again and again. I'm resigned to the fact that given the current political conditions in this legislature, we are unlikely to completely and permanently solve the crisis of unaccountable policing this session, but I do believe that we can work together to keep the peace. And as the elected senator of South Minneapolis, it is my responsibility to remind all of us, all of our members, that it is folks in our community who have envisioned a better way. So please vote no on this bill. Let's stop the games and let's get to work. Thank you.